Let me tell you about the moment my father stopped laughing. He'd been doubled over at my kitchen table, tears running down his face, slapping the wood with one hand, while I stood there holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I just told him the whole thing, the rent, the groceries, the way Corinne's boyfriend barely moved from that second-hand couch, and then the phone call that had come in the previous Tuesday from a woman I'd never met but somehow already despised. My dad laughed until he wheezed, and then he stopped. He looked up at me with wet eyes and a face that had gone completely still, and he said, "Diane, that's not funny at all." He was right, it wasn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Diane Marsh. I'm 49 years old, and I've been operating a tower crane for going on 22 years. I know, people look at me sideways when I say it. A woman my age, up in a cab 60, sometimes 90 feet off the ground, moving steel beams and concrete forms across a construction site in the gray early morning before most people have finished their first cup of coffee. I've heard every comment there is. I stopped caring about them somewhere around the time I got my Class A certification and watched a 26-year-old foreman's jaw drop when I landed a load within a half-inch of his chalk mark. That's my job. I'm good at it. I go up, I do the work, I come down. I live in Clover Ridge, one of those quiet suburban pockets outside of Columbus, where the houses are close enough together that you can hear your neighbor's sprinkler system, but spaced far enough apart that you can pretend you have privacy. I've been in my house for 14 years. It's a 3-bedroom ranch on Sycamore Bend. Nothing fancy, but I own it outright. I keep the gutters clean, and there's a little desk in the spare room where I keep my aquarium. 12 gallons, freshwater planted tank, neon tetras, a pair of pearl gouramis, and one ancient bristlenose pleco I've had for 6 years, named absolutely nothing, because I'm not that kind of person. I just like watching them. After a long shift, sitting in the dark with just the tank light humming and those fish drifting through the Java fern, it settles something in me that nothing else quite does. My daughter Corinne is 23. She has my stubbornness and her father's laugh and a good heart that I worry about constantly, because good hearts tend to attract people who know how to use them. She moved out at 21 into an apartment across town, a decent 2-bedroom in a complex called Willowgate, the kind of place with a gym nobody uses, and a leasing office that smells like plug-in air freshener. The rent was $1,150 a month. Corinne was working as a veterinary technician, pulling in about $36,000 a year before taxes, which is not a lot of money for Columbus in 2023, but she was managing. She was proud of managing. I was proud of her for being proud. Then she met Trent. Trent Boyle came into her life approximately 11 months before that November, via a mutual friend at a birthday party, and within 3 months he had moved into her apartment. I didn't love the timeline, but I kept my mouth shut because Corinne is an adult, and I remember being 22 and certain about everything. Trent was 26. He had a pleasant enough face, the kind that photographs well and reveals very little. He'd had a few jobs, something in sales, something in logistics, something involving content creation that he was always vague about. And by the time he was sleeping in my daughter's apartment full-time, he wasn't doing any of them. The first time I really noticed the shape of the situation was back in late September when Corinne called me on a Sunday evening. She sounded tired in a specific way. Not physically tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying something you haven't named yet. "Mark, I'm fine," she said before I'd asked, which is always the sentence that means the opposite. "Okay," I said. "How's the apartment?" "It's good. It's fine. Trent's been working on his portfolio." "His portfolio for what?" A pause. "Photography. He thinks he can do event photography, like weddings and stuff." "Has he gotten any bookings?" "He's still building the portfolio, Mom." I let it go. I went back to watching my fish. But in October she mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd covered rent herself that month because Trent was between things. And in the same breath, she told me she'd also done the grocery run because he'd had some kind of issue with his debit card. I remember standing in my driveway when she said this, keys in my hand, looking at the bare oak tree at the edge of my yard and feeling something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. By November, that cold had settled into the bones of everything. It was a raw, gray November, the kind this part of Ohio does better than anywhere, where the sky looks like wet concrete and the wind comes off the flat land with nothing to slow it down. I was working a commercial build on the east side of Columbus, a 6-story mixed-use project, and I was in the cab by 6:15 most mornings with a thermos of coffee and the kind of bone-deep weariness that 49 feels different from 39. Not bad different, just different. I knew my body now, the way you know an old truck, what it needs, what it can do, when to be careful. I went to Corinne's apartment on a Saturday afternoon in the second week of November to drop off a slow cooker I'd promised her months ago and just never gotten around to delivering. She'd texted me that she was working a half day at the clinic and would be back by 2. I got there at 2:15. She buzzed me up. Trent opened the door. He was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, barefoot, holding his phone. The television was on behind him, some YouTube video, loud. The apartment smelled like takeout containers and something slightly stale that I couldn't identify but recognized as the smell of a space that hadn't had a window opened in too long. "Hey, Diane," he said, stepping back to let me in. He had that easy, slightly too casual manner that some people mistake for confidence. "Corinne's not back yet." "I know," I said. "She texted me. I'll wait." I set the slow cooker on the kitchen counter. The sink had dishes in it. The coffee table in the living room had 3 empty glasses, a pizza box folded in half, and Trent's laptop open to what looked like a Reddit thread. There was a half-eaten bag of chips on the couch cushion next to where he'd obviously just been sitting. "You need anything?" he asked, already drifting back toward the couch. "I'm good," I said. I stood in the kitchen and I looked around. I'm a practical person. I've spent 2 decades reading construction sites, understanding load limits, seeing what's stable and what isn't. And what I was seeing in that kitchen was not stable. The grocery receipt on the counter had Corinne's name on the credit card line. The stack of mail near the microwave had 1 envelope from the leasing office, addressed to Corinne Marsh, with the word "statement" visible through the clear plastic window. Just Corinne's name, not Trent's. She came in 20 minutes later, still in her scrubs, a little windburned from the parking lot. Her face lit up when she saw me, and that made my chest hurt in a way I couldn't explain. "Mom, you actually brought it!" She hugged me and looked at the slow cooker. "Okay, I've been wanting this for months." "I know," I said. I finally got myself together. We made tea and sat at her small kitchen table while Trent stayed on the couch with his headphones on, which told me he was either very comfortable with being ignored or very practiced at making himself invisible when it suited him. Corinne talked about work, a cat that had come in with a broken pelvis, a staff meeting about scheduling, a coworker she liked. She was animated and warm, and I watched her and I thought, she is paying for all of this. This whole life she's built here, she is paying for it by herself, and the man on that couch is letting her. I didn't say it, not that day, but as I was putting on my jacket to leave, she walked me to the door and lowered her voice. "I should tell you," she said, "Trent's mom might be coming to visit, for a while." I looked at her. How long is a while? Corinne's eyes did something complicated, a flicker of something she was trying to smooth over before I could read it. She's going through some things. Her lease ended and she's figuring out her next step. "Corinne, it's just temporary, Mom." I zipped my jacket. I looked past her shoulder at the apartment, the dishes, the pizza box, Trent's outline on the couch. I did the math on the square footage, on the rent, on my daughter's take-home pay after taxes and health insurance. When? I said. She might come next week. Her name's Roberta. I drove home through the gray November streets, and I sat in front of my tank for a long time. The Tetras moved in their small school, back and forth, and the Pleco worked its slow way up the glass wall the way it always does, unbothered and ancient and certain of its world. I was not certain of anything, because I had heard something in Corinne's voice when she said that name, Roberta, something careful and practiced, like a person who has already been coached on what words to use. And the thing about working at Heights for 22 years is that you develop a very precise sense for when something is about to shift. You feel it before you see it. A vibration, a change in the tension of the line. I felt it then. Sitting in my dark living room with the fish tank humming, something was already in motion, and my daughter was right in the middle of it, paying for every inch of the floor it was moving across. Roberta Boyle arrived on a Wednesday. I know it was a Wednesday because I was on shift. Crane was running by 6, the pour was scheduled for 8, and I had my phone on silent in my jacket pocket, the way I always do when I'm in the cab. When I climbed down at noon and turned the volume back on, there were 4 texts from Corinne. The first one said, "She's here." The second said, "She brought a lot of stuff." The third said, "Mom, she brought like a lot of stuff." The fourth one, sent 40 minutes after the third, said nothing at all, just a single emoji. The one with the face that's trying to smile and clearly failing. I called her back on my lunch break, sitting in my truck with a sandwich I wasn't eating. "How much is a lot?" I asked. 2 suitcases and 4 boxes, Corinne said. Her voice had that particular flatness that means she's already had the feeling and processed it, and is now operating on the other side of it, where things are just facts. And a printer. She brought a printer, Mom. Who moves in somewhere temporarily and brings their printer? Someone who isn't planning on leaving, I said. Silence. She has a lot of opinions, Corinne said carefully, about the apartment. What kind of opinions? She rearranged the living room while I was at work this morning. She said the couch placement was cutting off the energy flow. I don't know what that means. She also threw out my dish rack because she said it was harboring bacteria, and replaced it with one she brought in one of the boxes. I sat there in my truck and stared at the windshield. She replaced your dish rack? With one she brought from home? Yes. I took a breath. Corinne, is your name on the lease? Yes. Only your name? Yes. Trent was going to be added, but it just never happened. Good, I thought. That was the one good thing I was holding on to, and I held it tight. I didn't say much else that day. I told her to call me if she needed anything, and I meant it in every possible interpretation of that sentence, and I think she knew that. We hung up, and I drove back to the site and climbed back into the cab and moved steel for the rest of the afternoon. And the whole time I was up there, 60-some feet in the air with the gray Ohio sky pressing down on everything, I was doing math. Not crane math, a different kind. Corinne made about $2,850 a month after taxes and her insurance deduction. Rent was $1,150. Utilities ran maybe $180 in November, probably more in December. Groceries for herself, maybe $300. That was $1,630 already. Add in her car payment, gas, her student loan minimum, her phone bill, and she had maybe $400 left over in a good month. $400. And she was feeding Trent, and presumably now Trent's mother, out of that $400, and paying for the roof over all 3 of their heads, and going to work every morning in her scrubs to look after other people's animals while her own apartment got rearranged by a woman she'd met less than a week ago. The anger came up so fast and so clean that it almost felt like relief. It was better than the cold dread I'd been sitting with. Anger, at least, pointed somewhere. I found out the rest of what happened that week from Corinne in pieces, the way you sometimes have to learn things, a little at a time, because the whole picture is too much to look at all at once. Roberta had, apparently, wasted no time. By Thursday evening, she had opinions about Corinne's cleaning schedule, which she communicated by leaving a handwritten list on the kitchen counter. Not asked, left, like a memo. Corinne found it when she got home from a 9-hour shift, still in her scrubs, feet aching, and there was this list. Bathroom, needs daily wipe down. Refrigerator, organized by food group. Entryway mat, replace, too small. And at the bottom, underlined, we should discuss a household contribution schedule. Corinne called me about the list. I could hear her trying to keep her voice even. A contribution schedule, I said. That's what it says. From the woman who contributes nothing. Mom, she's Trent's mom. I can't just… Corinne? I stopped. I made myself stop because I knew that if I pushed too hard in that direction, she'd shut down and defend him out of loyalty or pride or whatever it was that kept her tethered to that situation. I knew my daughter. I knew how she worked. Did Trent say anything about the list? A pause. He said his mom is just organized. Of course he did. Friday was when it tipped into something I couldn't process calmly. Corinne called me at 7 in the evening, and this time the flatness was gone from her voice. She sounded younger. She sounded like she was 23 years old and genuinely frightened. And that sound did something to me that I don't have good words for. It went straight through the glass I'd been keeping between myself and this whole situation. She told Trent, Corinne said, that she thinks I should add him to the lease, so he has security. Those were her words, security. She said that to you? She said it to Trent while I was in the room, like I was a piece of furniture they were discussing. And what did Trent say? He said it was a good idea and that he'd bring it up with me when the time was right. Her voice cracked just slightly on the last 4 words. Mom, they were making plans for my apartment, my lease, and I was standing right there. I sat down on my couch. The fish tank hummed. I looked at the Pleco moving its slow, deliberate way across the glass, and I thought, very clearly, this ends now, not tomorrow, now. Don't sign anything, I said. Don't add anyone to that lease, not Trent, not Roberta. Do you hear me? Yes. And don't let anyone tell you that you owe them security. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. She was quiet for a moment, then, I don't know how to make them leave, Mom. I know, I said. I'm going to help you figure it out. That was Friday. On Saturday morning, I drove to my father's house. My dad, Leonard Marsh, is 74 years old. He retired from the Columbus Fire Department after 30 years, and he lives in the same house in Hilliard where I grew up, and he still makes his own coffee with a percolator, because he thinks drip machines are a moral failing. He's hard of hearing in his left ear, and he has opinions about everything, and he loved Corinne's mother, which is a whole other story. And when I walked into his kitchen that Saturday morning and sat down at that yellow Formica table that has been in that kitchen since 1987, he took one look at my face and poured me a cup without asking. I told him everything. That's when he laughed. That's when I started from the beginning. I told him about Trent, about the rent, about the groceries, about Roberta and her printer, and her dish rack, and her handwritten list, and her plans for my daughter's lease. I told him all of it, and he laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes, and I stood there holding my cold coffee, thinking that I was glad someone found it funny, because I certainly did not. And then he stopped laughing, and he looked at me the way he used to look at a fire that had gotten into the walls, not panicked, just very focused and very serious, and he said, "Diane, that's not funny at all." "No," I said, "it isn't." He set his cup down. The lease is in Corinne's name only? Only hers. And this woman, Roberta, she has no rental agreement, nothing in writing, nothing that puts her there legally? Nothing. She just showed up with suitcases. He nodded slowly. Then she's a guest, an unwanted one, but a guest, and guests can be asked to leave. Corinne is 23 and she's been living with this boy for 8 months, and his mother just walked into her home and started leaving management memos on the counter. She doesn't know how to ask them to leave. Then someone needs to show her. He looked at me steadily. You know Patty Oleander's daughter is a landlord-tenant attorney now, down in Worthington. Patty mentioned it at the VFW last month. I hadn't known that. I didn't know Patty Oleander well. She was more my dad's generation, someone who'd been around the edges of my parents' social world since before I was born. But the word attorney landed in my chest like something solid, something I could hold. Do you have her number? I said. He got up and went to the little corkboard by the refrigerator that he's had since the Clinton administration, covered in cards and notes and a photo of me at my crane certification that he put up and I've pretended not to notice. He unpinned a card and brought it back to the table. Cynthia Oleander, attorney at law, landlord, tenant, and housing, a Worthington address and a phone number. I took the card. I turned it over in my hands. Call her Monday, my dad said. First thing. I will. He poured more coffee. The percolator sputtered on the counter. Outside his kitchen window, the November yard was bare and brown and very still. He looked at me over his cup and said, You going to be okay this weekend? I'm going to be busy this weekend, I said. I'm going to do my homework. Because that's what I did when I got home. I did not call Corinne because I didn't want to alarm her before I had something concrete to offer. I did not drive to the apartment because showing up angry never helps anything, and I was still angry. Instead, I sat down at my desk in the spare room, the one with the fish tank, the one where I keep my files, and I opened my laptop and I started reading. Ohio Landlord-Tenant Law, Guest versus Tenant Distinctions. What constitutes a tenancy by implication? How much notice is required to remove someone who has no lease agreement? What rights a leaseholder has when unauthorized occupants are present? I read for 4 hours. The pleco worked up and down the glass. The tetras drifted through the java fern. I took notes in the small spiral notebook I use for job site calculations, the one with the green cover, and I filled up 2 pages in my small, neat handwriting, the handwriting of someone who's spent 20 years logging crane operations in logbooks, and by the time I was done, I understood the shape of what we were dealing with. Roberta had no rights to that apartment, none. She was a licensee at best, a guest invited by a tenant, and if the leaseholder, meaning Corinne, withdrew that invitation formally and in writing, Roberta would have no legal standing. The problem wasn't the law. The law was actually, for once, fairly clear and fairly kind to Corinne's position. The problem was Trent. Because Trent was the one Corinne had let into her life, and Trent was the link between Corinne and Roberta, and Trent was the one who'd been living rent-free in her apartment for months, and who now apparently saw the apartment as his family's shared resource. And if Corinne moved to remove Roberta, Trent would make it about their relationship. He would make her choose. And I did not know, not yet, whether Corinne was ready to face that choice. That was the thing that kept me up Sunday night. Not the law, not Roberta. Trent. Because I had a plan forming, something careful, something with steps, something that would give Corinne the tools to protect herself without pushing her into a corner before she was ready. I'd talk to Cynthia Oleander's office on Monday. I'd understand the process better. I'd lay it all out for my daughter in a way she could hear. But I also knew, the way you know when a load is shifting before the line goes taut, that Trent was going to become a problem the moment Corinne tried to take back control of her own front door. And that Monday morning, before I even got to call the attorney's office, Corinne texted me. Mom. Roberta just, Mom. Roberta just told me she's taking my bedroom because it has the better closet. She says I can sleep on the pullout in the living room. Mom, what do I do? I read that text standing in my driveway with my keys in my hand and my work boots still on, and I felt something lock into place inside my chest. Not rage, not panic, but something quieter and colder than both. The kind of stillness that comes right before you make a decision you've been circling for days. I typed back, "Do not move a single thing. I'm on my way." I called Cynthia Oleander from the car. I'd spoken to her office on Monday, left a voicemail, and she'd called me back Tuesday afternoon. A calm, precise woman who asked good questions and listened without interrupting. I'd explained the whole situation. She'd confirmed what my research had told me. Roberta had no tenancy rights. She was a licensee, and a licensee's permission to remain could be withdrawn by the leaseholder at any time. She'd walked me through the language to use, what to put in writing, and what to do if Roberta refused to leave. I had her cell number because she'd given it to me herself at the end of the call and said, "If anything escalates, use this." I used it now. She picked up on the third ring. I told her what the text said. There was a brief pause on her end, and then she said, "Okay, that's actually helpful. That's the kind of move that makes the next step very clean. Go to the apartment. Be calm. I'm going to text you a template right now, a written notice, revocation of license to occupy. Get her to see it tonight. You don't need her signature. You just need to deliver it." By the time I pulled into the Willowgate parking lot, Cynthia's text had come through with the template. I forwarded it to my email, pulled it up on my phone, and sat in my car for 60 seconds doing the thing I'd learned to do before a difficult lift, slowing my breathing, seeing the whole picture, knowing exactly where I was going to put the load before I moved it an inch. Then, I got out of the car. Corinne buzzed me up without a word. I rode the elevator to the third floor and walked down the hall and knocked twice, and the door opened, and it wasn't Corinne who opened it. It was Trent. He had that same easy, slightly too casual look he always had, but there was something underneath it tonight, a wariness he was trying to cover, like a man who knows a storm is coming and has decided to act like he doesn't see the clouds. "Diane," he said. "Trent," I said, "I need to come in." I didn't wait for him to step aside. I walked past him into the apartment. Corinne was in the kitchen doorway, still in her scrubs, her arms crossed over her chest in the posture of someone who has been holding themselves together with effort. Her eyes found mine immediately, and I could see the relief and the fear in them at the same time. Roberta was on the couch, my daughter's couch, in my daughter's living room, with a cup of tea and a magazine open on her lap, and she looked up at me with the particular expression of someone who has decided in advance that whoever is coming through the door is going to be a problem they already know how to handle. Roberta Boyle was somewhere in her mid-50s. She had Trent's same photographable face and his same quality of revealing very little. She was wearing a cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked, I'll give her this, completely at home. That was the thing that struck me hardest in those first seconds. Not her presence, but how settled she looked. How thoroughly she had made herself at home in a space that was not hers. "You must be Diane," she said. Her voice was pleasant, even warm. "Corinne talks about you. I'm Roberta." "I know who you are," I said. I kept my voice level. "I need to speak with Corinne privately for a moment. Then I'd like to speak with you." Roberta set her magazine down. "I don't see why anything needs to be private. We're all family here." I looked at her steadily. "We're not, actually, but we can have this conversation however you'd like." Trent said from behind me, "Diane, I don't think you need to—" "Trent," I turned to look at him, "I'm going to ask you to give me a few minutes with your mother, please." Something in my voice, not loudness, not anger, just the absolute flatness of a person who has already decided, made him close his mouth. I turned to Corinne. "Can we step into your room?" "That's my room now," Roberta said, and she said it pleasantly, the way someone says something they believe is simply a fact. The apartment went very quiet. I looked at Roberta. I looked at her for a long moment. And then I said calmly, "No, it isn't. And that's actually exactly what I'm here to talk about." I took my phone out and I opened Cynthia's template and I read it through one more time. I already had it memorized, but I wanted to be certain of every word. Then I looked up at Roberta. "You arrived at this apartment last Wednesday," I said. "You have no lease agreement, no rental contract, nothing in writing that gives you any right to occupy this space. Under Ohio law, that makes you a licensee, a guest, at the sole discretion of the leaseholder. The leaseholder is Corinne, only Corinne." I paused. "I'm here because Corinne is withdrawing that permission. In writing, tonight, with a copy sent to the leasing office." Roberta's pleasant expression didn't fall. It shifted, became something more careful, more calculating. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "Trent lives here. I'm his mother. I have every right to—" "Trent is also not on the lease," I said. "He also has no legal tenancy rights, but that's a separate conversation." I looked at my daughter. "Corinne, do you want to tell Roberta directly, or would you like me to?" Corinne uncrossed her arms. I watched her straighten. She'd been carrying something for weeks. I could see the weight of it in the way she'd been standing, in the careful, practiced flatness of her voice on the phone. And I watched it shift, right then, right in front of me. Not gone, but different, redistributed. "Roberta," she said, and her voice was steady, "I need you to leave. I should have said that the day you got here, and I'm saying it now. This is my apartment. I pay for it. I've been paying for everything in it, and I'm done with arrangements that don't work for me." Trent said, "Corinne, come on." "I'm not talking to you right now," she said, and she said it without heat, without drama, just with an absolutely clear-eyed finality that made him stop. Roberta stood up. She put her magazine on the coffee table and her tea beside it, and she looked at me, not at Corinne, at me, and said, "You've coached her to do this." "I've supported her in doing what she should have done a week ago," I said. "There's a difference. She's 23 years old and she doesn't understand what she's throwing away." "She understands exactly what she's throwing away," I said. "She's thought about it. So have I. And neither of us thinks it's worth very much." That landed. I saw it land, a small tightening around Roberta's eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt, but was somewhere between them. She looked at Trent. He was standing near the kitchen doorway with his arms loose at his sides, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely uncertain. The easy casualness had dropped away, and there was nothing underneath it. Just a 26-year-old man who had been living on someone else's effort and someone else's money, and had never once, as far as I could tell, asked himself what that cost. "Trent," Roberta said, "say something." He looked at Corinne, and Corinne looked back at him with an expression I recognized. It was the expression of someone who is waiting to see if the other person is going to surprise them, and who already knows the answer. He didn't surprise her. "I mean," he said, "I think everyone needs to calm down a little." Corinne nodded once, slowly, like she'd needed to hear that. Not because it helped, but because it confirmed something she'd been trying not to be certain of. "Roberta," I said, "I'm going to hand you a printed copy of this notice tomorrow morning. Tonight, I'm sending it by email and certified mail. You have 7 days to vacate, which is more than the law requires for a licensee with no written agreement. I'm being generous because I'm trying to do this without involving Franklin County sheriffs. But if you're still here on day 8, that changes." Roberta picked up her tea. She sat back down. "I'm not leaving tonight," she said. "I'm not asking you to leave tonight," I said. "I'm telling you the clock has started." I stayed another hour. Not because anything dramatic happened, it didn't. Roberta retreated to the bedroom that was not hers and closed the door. Trent sat on the couch and stared at his phone and didn't say anything else. Corinne and I sat at her small kitchen table and I showed her everything. The written notice, the email confirmation, the certified mail receipt, the name and number of the Franklin County non-emergency line if things escalated. I showed her the notes I'd taken in my green-covered notebook. I showed her that I'd done this carefully, that there was a shape to it, that she wasn't standing in the middle of something formless and overwhelming. There was a process. It had steps. She could follow the steps. She sat across from me with her hands around a mug of tea, and at some point she said, very quietly, "I've been so stupid." "You haven't," I said. "You were generous with someone who used generosity as a resource. Those are different things." She looked at me. "Are you going to tell me you didn't see it coming?" "I saw pieces of it," I said. "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to push you before you were ready. Maybe that was wrong. I've been turning that over." "No," she said. "I had to see it myself. I think I needed to see the bedroom thing. I needed it to go that far." She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. "I keep doing the math, in my head, how much I've spent since he moved in." I let her. "Rent I covered, 2 full months," she said. "Groceries, probably $400, $500 extra a month since June. That's, I don't know, maybe $3,000? And now his mother has been here 6 days, and she's already replaced my dish rack and written me a chore chart and decided she gets the better closet." She laughed, a short, dry sound that wasn't quite humor. $3,000 and a chore chart. "And approximately 0 contributions from either of them," I said. "0, she agreed. I drove home at 9:30. The certified mail receipt was in my bag. Cynthia had already confirmed receipt of the forwarded email. The notice was delivered. Roberta was gone by day 5. I don't know exactly what happened in those 5 days inside that apartment. Corinne told me pieces. Roberta made one more attempt. She called me directly on day 2, having gotten my number from Trent's phone, and she used that same pleasant, reasonable voice to tell me that I was damaging my daughter's relationship and that I should stay in my lane. I told her, with equal pleasantness, that my lane was wherever my daughter needed me, and that if she wanted to discuss her timeline for vacating, she could contact Cynthia Oleander's office. Then I ended the call. She didn't call again. Trent left with Roberta on day 5. He packed 3 bags, and he carried them out while Corinne was at work, which told me everything I needed to know about his particular kind of courage. He left his second-hand couch. He left 3 empty glasses on the coffee table. He left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I think we need space. I'll be in touch." He was not in touch. As far as I know, 6 weeks later, he still hasn't been.